In today's lesson, we're going to look at listing outcomes. When an event takes place, obviously a number of different outcomes can result. We can list the outcomes for a single event, or we can list the outcomes for more than one event. So let's start with just a single event taking place. So one event taking place, and we're going to list all the different outcomes that could occur. So question number 1 says, list all the outcomes for the following event. And number 1 is an ordinary die is rolled. So this is a normal dice, it's rolled, what could the outcomes be? So the outcomes you could get on a dice are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. Those are all the possible outcomes on the dice or the die. Notice I've numbered them in numerical order. It gives me a better way of checking my results. I haven't gone, for example, 3, then 6, 2, 1. Keep some structure to your work. And the next one we've got, next event, is a playing card is selected from the heart suit. So we haven't got the whole pack of cards here, we've just got the hearts, and we're going to list all the outcomes that could occur. So we could have the ace of hearts. I'm just going to put the heart symbol in. We could have 2 of hearts, 3 of hearts, 4 of hearts, 5 of hearts, 6 of hearts, 7 of hearts, 8 of hearts, 9 of hearts, 10 of hearts. Then no 11, we go jack of hearts, queen of hearts, and the king of hearts. Obviously some of you might prefer the ace of hearts to be at the end. I put it at the beginning, but again, the results are put down in a numerical order. Okay, sometimes though we haven't got one single event going on, like the dice or the pack of playing cards, we can have a combination of events. So more than one event. And again, when you're doing it, let's think of a structured approach, changing one of the items at a time. So the example here, Sam is choosing her breakfast. She can choose 1 cereal and 1 drink. So those are your 2 events. She chooses an item of cereal and she's going to choose a drink to go along with it. So the choice of cereals are cornflakes, Weetabix or bran flakes, and her drinks are tea or coffee. So we're going to list all the outcomes. Now to save us with a little bit of writing, let's use C for cornflakes, W for Weetabix, and BF for bran flakes. And we'll use T for tea, and C for coffee. So I'll start with my first cereal choice, which is going to be cornflakes. I'm starting with the first one purposely to give me a bit of structure to my work. So I'm going for cornflakes is my chosen cereal, and I'm going to go for the first drink option, which is tea. So if we have this option here, it means Sam has chosen cornflakes as a cereal and tea as a drink. We're going to change one item at a time. So I'm going to keep with cornflakes as my cereal, but I'm going to change the drink. So instead of having cornflakes with tea, we're going to go cornflakes with coffee. Now, there are no other options we can have if we have cornflake as a cereal, because we've gone through having it with tea, having it with coffee. So I now need to change my cereal, and I'm going to go for the second one in the list. So I'm going to go Weetabix, and my chosen drink, again, the first one is going to be tea, or I could have Weetabix with coffee. No other options if I'm having Weetabix, so I'm going to go on to the third cereal, bran flakes with tea, or I could have bran flakes with coffee. So that lists now all the possible outcomes, the 6 different combinations that Sam could choose for her breakfast. Let's have a look at another one. So this one has come off a GCSE past paper, marks are down the side. It says a fair dice and a fair coin are thrown once. Fill in the table below to show all the possible outcomes. They've started off here for you, On the top line you can see they put H1, so that'd be head with 1 on the dice. H2, head with 2 on the dice. So continuing that, we could have H or a head with 3 on the dice. We could have head on the coin with 4 on the dice, head on the coin with 5 on the dice, and head on the coin with 6 on the dice. So that's all the options if the coin lands on heads. We could have it with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 on the dice. But now we have to look at if it landed, the coin had landed on tails. So we've done tails 1, so we could also have tails 2, tails 3, tails 4, tails 5, and finally tails 6. So that's all the possible outcomes if we throw the fair dice and the ordinary coin. We'll answer the questions below because it'll just be a little bit of revision for you. So write down the probability of obtaining a head and a 4. Well, there's only one option that shows a head and a 4. So that's one way out of all the possible outcomes we could have altogether. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 possible outcomes. So 1 out of those 12 shows a head and a 4. And the last question says, write down the probability of obtaining a tail and a number less than 3. So to do this one, we want a tail and a number less than 3. So I could have tail with a number 1, and I could have tail with a number 2. I can't have tail with a 3 because notice the question says less than 3. Less than 3 does not include 3. It's all the numbers left in it. So I have circled 2 possible outcomes that show me a tail and a number less than 3. Out of the 12 possible outcomes in total, and I'll simplify that because they're both even numbers, so that would simplify to 1 over 6. And the next question. 4 people, Tom, Becky, Chris and Matt, work in a garage. 2 people work at any one time. List all the possible pairs of people that could be working together at one time. So again, we're going to abbreviate the names, so T, B, C and M. And we'll take the first person in the list, which is Tom, and we'll have him working with Becky, the second name in the list. Changing one item at a time. So I'm going to keep Tom the same. Tom's going to still be working, but this time he's not going to be working with Becky, he's going to be working with Chris. Or I could have Tom working with Matt. So I've shown all the outcomes here now where Tom is working with each of the individual people. Right, so let's move on to the next name then. Becky. So B for Becky. Now, we've already got her working with Tom, but she could work with Chris, and she could also work with Matt. The next name on the list then is going to be, so we've done Tom, we've done Becky, let's do Chris. Now we've already got Chris working with Tom here. We've also already got Chris working with Becky. So the only one we need to include now is Chris working with Matt. And if we just go through and check now, the next name on your list would be Matt. But you can see that we've got Matt working with Tom here, Matt working with Becky there, and Matt working with Chris there. So we have completed the list. That's all the different combinations of having 2 of these people working in the garage. And the last question we'll have a look at then. Here are 2 spinners. List all the possible outcomes when each spinner is spun. So each spinner is going to be spun once, and we need to list all the possible outcomes. So the first spinner, the one on the left hand side, the spinner could land on a 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. And the spinner on the right could land on 5, 10, 15 or 20. And again, I'm going to do it in numerical order. So if I take the spinner on the left first, that could land on a 1. So I've gone for the lowest value it could land on. and then the second spinner, the lowest value that land on is 5. So I could have 1 on the first spinner, 5 on the second. Changing one item at a time, so I'm going to keep 1 on the first spinner, but the second spinner might not land on a 1. I'm going to have it landing on the next number, 10. Again, there are more options. If the first spinner lands on 1, I could have the second spinner landing on 15, or I could have the second spinner landing on 20. That's all the possible results there if the first spinner lands on 1. So now we go on to the next number. This first spinner could land on 2. So I could have 2 on the first spinner and 5 on the second. I could have 2 on the first spinner and 10 on the second. 2 on the first spinner and 15 on the second. 2 on the first spinner and 20 on the second. That's all the options if the first spinner lands on 2, but the first spinner might land on the next number, which would be 3. So I could have 3 on the first spinner, 5 on the second, 3 on the first, 10 on the second, 3 on the first, 15 on the second, 3 on the first, and 20 on the second. And we're going to continue with that. So the first spinner, however, could land on 4. So we could have 4 with a 5, we could have 4 with 10, we could have 4 with 15, or we could have 4 with 20. And finally, the only other option then for the first spinner would be it landing on 5. So we could have 5 with 5, we could have 5 with a 10 on the second, 5 with 15 on the second, and finally 5 with 20 on the second one. So that there shows you all the different outcomes when these two spinners are spun. And that's the end of the lesson.